After the car accident, I was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. As my fiancé, Evan was the last to arrive. There was still a smear of white cream on his face, not yet wiped clean. So the urgent matter he claimed had forced him to leave me alone on the highway turned out to be celebrating his first love's birthday. What was strange was that I actually caught a flicker of panic on his face. The doctor said it was nothing short of a miracle that I woke up. I shook my head. It wasn't a miracle. When I was on the brink of death, I made a deal with a pawnshop. I traded away something in exchange for a second chance at living. They exchanged uneasy looks. No one believed me. Only Evan frowned and asked, "What did you pawn?" "I don't remember." I smiled at him. "Probably nothing important." Chapter 1. I was in the emergency room all night. Early the next morning, the nurse making rounds nearly screamed when she saw my eyes open. She rushed out, and within minutes returned with a group of doctors. They ran test after test, studying me as if I were some rare specimen. In the end, they reached a single conclusion. A miracle. They said my recovery speed was nothing short of miraculous. After I was transferred out of the ICU, it didn't take long before word spread and people began coming to see me. I was the Harrington family's only daughter. By the next morning, news of my accident was everywhere. The first person to visit me was my mother. She stood beside my hospital bed, looking down at me. There was no concern in her eyes, no grief, only reproach and a thin layer of disgust. "I told you," she said coldly. "Next month is your wedding to Evan. This marriage will be watched by everyone. This is not the time for mistakes." And what do you do instead? You run onto the highway alone in the middle of the night? If you chose to put your life at risk, that's on you. Don't drag the Harrington family down with you. I listened patiently, then offered my well-practiced apology. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." She let out a sharp snort. "If I'd known, I never would have brought you back in the first place." She didn't stay long, coming and going in a hurry. The ward finally fell quiet. I let out a long breath and turned to look out the window. I was indeed the only daughter of the Harrington family, but I had been switched at birth and spent the first 15 years of my life elsewhere. 5 years ago, I was brought back, and the girl who had grown up in the Harrington household was sent away. From that moment on, I became after-dinner gossip among the city's upper circles. As for my biological parents, all the love they had for a daughter had long since been poured into that other girl. Not long after I moved into the Harrington home, whatever guilt they felt, and the thin affection that came with it, was slowly worn away by my clumsiness and my lack of polish. They began to miss the girl they had raised with their own hands, and came to see me as the one who had ruined their family. The awkward tension at home eased somewhat after I got engaged to Evan. My mother stopped treating me with open disdain. My father no longer acted as if I were invisible. As long as I behaved and did as I was told, they were willing to show me a pleasant face, on one condition: obedience. Running onto the highway alone in the middle of the night could hardly be called disobedience. It was closer to suicide. By late morning, everyone who was going to come had come. Near lunchtime, my hospital door was suddenly yanked open. I looked up to see Evan standing outside, looking disheveled, his usually immaculate hair slightly undone, his tie crooked. As my fiancé, he had finally arrived. If I hadn't made it through the night, he wouldn't have even made it in time for the funeral. Chapter 2. Evan was breathing hard, as if he'd rushed over in a hurry. When he saw me propped up against the hospital bed, the panic on his face, barely concealed, ebbed away like a receding tide. He stepped inside, frowning at me. "Since it's nothing serious, why make it sound so dire? Anna, was going this far really necessary just to get me here? Nothing serious?" Before I could respond, a doctor passing by the door stopped. He frowned and walked in, eyeing Evan coolly. When she was brought in, she was barely hanging on. For broken ribs, a fractured left leg, severe head trauma, pulmonary contusions. The doctor recited my admission report. With every item he listed, Evan's expression darkened a shade. By the end, the doctor let out a sigh. "The fact that this young woman can sit here listening to you talk is pure luck." He checked my injuries and added, "Whatever you do, don't ever run onto the highway alone again. It's far too dangerous." When he said that, I could clearly feel Evan's body stiffen. Naturally. He was the one at fault. Evan stood there in silence. I glanced at him and noticed the streak of white cream still clinging to his right cheek, not yet wiped away. I froze for a moment, then suddenly remembered what day yesterday had been. October 13th. Sherry's birthday. So last night, when he left me alone on the highway claiming he had something urgent to deal with, all he had really done was go celebrate Sherry's birthday. Back when my family first arranged my engagement to Evan, I had actually felt a flicker of happiness. I had just entered the city's upper circles, anxious and out of place, and the only person I had any real fondness for was Evan. A month after I was brought back into the Harrington family, my mother took me to a formal banquet. She warned me not to wander off and told me to stay close to her, to avoid embarrassing her. But the venue was enormous, and the crowd overwhelming. Before long, I lost sight of her. Like an ugly duckling stumbling into a prince and princess ball, I stood there utterly at a loss. A few teenagers gathered around me, their voices dripping with mockery. "So you're the Harringtons' real daughter, the one they found? Your skin looks so rough. And your hair is so dry. I heard you spent more than 10 years down south. Do you still have an accent when you speak?" I clenched my skirt and spoke carefully. "Could you please let me through? I need to find my mother." They paused for a beat, then burst out laughing. They were laughing at my accent. I had been trying hard to correct it, but a single month was far too little time. "Is that really so funny?" a voice cut in. "I think her accent is kind of cute." A tall, slender boy stepped forward from the side. When the others saw him, their laughter gradually died down. I had never seen a boy so striking. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he walked up to me, smiling slightly, and leaned in to study me. "So," he said, "you're the Harrington's daughter." I stared at him wide-eyed, so stunned I forgot how to speak. "Come on," he said. "Your mother is talking with mine. She asked me to come find you." He took my hand and led me out of the circle of teenagers. And just like that, he pulled me away from the awkwardness and humiliation I had been drowning in. Later, I quietly asked around and learned his name. Evan, heir to the Caldwell family. Chapter 3. Evan was, by all accounts, the golden boy. He was also one of the most prominent students at the academy. When I first transferred there, thanks to our family's long-standing ties, he often looked out for me. He shielded me from other privileged kids, stood up for me, and stepped in whenever I was bullied. Growing up, no one had ever protected me like that. So I followed behind him, tagging along as his shadow, for 3 years. And I did so gladly. Even now, looking back, I still think that falling for Evan was the most natural thing in the world. So when my family decided a year ago that I should get engaged to him, I agreed without much hesitation. What I hadn't expected was that the engagement itself would make Evan despise me, beyond any hope of repair. He didn't like me. He already had someone he loved. Her name was Sherry, one of the few students at Mingyang Academy admitted purely on academic merit. She was smart, beautiful, gentle, and capable vice president of the student council. Aside from family background, she and Evan looked perfectly matched. For her sake, Evan disappeared on the day of our engagement ceremony. When he was finally dragged back, he looked utterly disheveled. I stared at him in confusion as he walked toward me, every step carrying despair and loathing. He shoved the ring onto my finger, almost roughly. Satisfied, he demanded. "Anna, is this what you wanted?" My finger burned where the metal scraped against my skin, and my eyes burned with it. If I'd had a choice, I would rather not have been engaged at all than be hated by him. But this marriage between our families left neither of us any real choice. We were both just pieces on the board. From that moment on, my relationship with Evan froze over. I loved him, and at the same time, I was racked with guilt, believing I had ruined what he and Sherry had together. Pulled in every direction by my emotions, I only became more self-effacing and eager to please whenever I was around him. I tried everything I could think of to make him a little happier. And somehow, I always managed to make things worse. In the year after our engagement, I didn't see him often. And every time we did meet, it ended badly. Last night, his family had repeatedly insisted that he take me back to the Caldwell family estate for dinner. But not long after the car got on the highway, he answered a phone call. When it ended, he pulled over onto the shoulder. "I have something urgent to take care of. Get out here, Lucy will come pick you up." At the time, I truly believed it was something important. Turns out, it was just to celebrate Sherry's birthday. The atmosphere in the hospital room suddenly turned awkward and still. The doctor examined me again, jotting notes into his chart. Without even looking up, he said, "The fact that you survived is a miracle. You'll need at least 3 months of rest." A miracle. I echoed softly, then said slowly, "It wasn't a miracle." The doctor's pen paused. "What?" I smiled at him. "You probably won't believe this, but when that sedan sent me flying, I already knew I wasn't going to make it." Evan looked up sharply, a frown forming between his brows. I didn't notice his reaction and went on. "While I was waiting for the ambulance, I could feel my blood draining away, my life slipping out of me. And right when I was at the brink of death, I think I saw something, a very strange pawnshop." The doctor blinked. A pawnshop? A hallucination? I don't know. But it felt very real. I searched my memory. I walked into that pawnshop, and the owner said he could make a deal with me. I didn't think much about it. I just wanted to live. So I pawned something in exchange for a chance to survive. The doctor didn't respond for a long moment. After a brief pause, he turned and headed for the door. "Wait here. I'm going to call in a psychiatrist." Watching him hurry away, I let out a quiet, helpless laugh. When I turned my head and met Evan's gaze, the smile at my lips froze. He looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing his words, before finally asking, "What did you pawn?" I was surprised that he actually believed what I'd said. I tugged lightly at the corner of my mouth. "I don't really remember. But it probably wasn't anything important." Evan said nothing. I changed the subject and asked instead, "Did you have fun last night?" His expression shifted, his voice turning stiff. "Last night, that was my fault. I apologize." He paused, then added, "Don't tell anyone about this. Otherwise, Sherry will be targeted by both the Caldwell and Harrington families." It wasn't even phrased as a request. It sounded like an instruction. Because he knew I felt guilty toward him, he was certain I would keep yielding when it came to Sherry. Sherry came from an ordinary family. She wouldn't be able to withstand even the slightest retaliation from two powerful households. I looked at him and nodded. "I understand." Evan visibly relaxed, though a faint sense of unease flickered through him. Before he could dwell on it, I spoke again. "As compensation, and as an apology, what are you going to give me?" He froze. "What?" "I almost died for this, and I covered for the woman you love. I'm not walking away empty-handed." I looked at him steadily. "Evan, I want 1/3 of the Caldwell Group's shares." As shock spread across his face, I curved my eyes into a smile. "I can even take a step back. After we're married, you can find a place outside and live there with Sherry. I won't interfere, as long as it doesn't get exposed to the media. Think it over carefully. This deal isn't a bad one." The mysterious pawnshop I'd encountered last night hadn't been something I made up. But it was true that I'd lied. I said I couldn't remember what I had pawned, but I did. I had pawned my ability to love. I no longer cared for my family. I no longer loved Evan, who had hurt me again and again. From this moment on, I would love only myself. In a way, I had become a certain kind of person. An extreme egoist. Evan stared at me, momentarily stunned. The look on his face turned distinctly unpleasant. His gaze grew heavy as it settled on me. "Anna, I know you're angry. If you have something to say, just say it. There's no need for the sarcasm." Sarcasm? But at that moment, I was being completely sincere. I studied his expression. "What are you angry about? Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" His breathing grew heavier, his emotions clearly unstable. Still, he didn't say anything more. He only left behind a curt line, "You're not fully recovered yet. I'm not in the mood to argue with you. I'm leaving." After Evan left, a deep exhaustion washed over me. I might have escaped with my life, but the damage to my body was very real. Just sitting up for a short while each day left me drained. I didn't think any further. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. During the time I was hospitalized, Evan came far more often than I had expected. He never did much, just sat quietly by my bed, working on his laptop or reading. I couldn't make sense of his intentions. Finally, one day, I spoke up. "Did something happen to Sherry?" Evan froze, then frowned. "What do you mean by that?" I was even more confused. "What do you mean? Usually, when you come to see me, it's because of Sherry, isn't it?" Did the Caldwell family go after her? Are you here to ask me to smooth things over for her? Or? Evan cut me off, clearly at his limit. Anna. Can you stop thinking of me as so? He paused, apparently unable to find the right word. Watching him in that state of embarrassed anger, I was taken aback. I stared at him for several seconds, then let out a short laugh. Evan, you're not coming to see me because you're worried about me, are you? A faint flush crept up his ears. I pressed on. Is it because I brushed past death that you finally figured out how you really feel? That you've started to like me? These were questions the old me would never have dared to ask. Because I knew perfectly well that doing so would only invite humiliation. But now, I didn't care anymore. My goal was simple, to get Evan to stop coming to the hospital. His presence here interfered with both my mood and my efficiency. Sure enough, after hearing me, Evan looked at me in brief astonishment and let out a scoff. You really are thick-skinned, Anna. Let me make this clear, I will never like you. Don't flatter yourself. That's for the best. I nodded. In that case, could you leave? If you stay any longer, I might actually start getting ideas. The vein at Evan's temple twitched. After a few seconds of silence, he shut his laptop and left the ward without looking back. After that, he never came again before I was discharged. Except that $2 million suddenly appeared in my private account. It was transferred by Evan. He still couldn't bear to part with his shares and chose to fob me off with cash instead. Fine. I would accept it, for now. Chapter 4. Because of the accident, my wedding to Evan was postponed by a month. So after I was discharged, the Caldwell and Harrington families began making a grand show of preparing for the ceremony. The marital home had long been arranged, a detached villa by the river. Evan rarely came back, and the villa was close to my company, so it effectively became my temporary residence. That day, my mother dragged me through a full day of wedding dress fittings, followed by hours of lecturing. By the time I got back, it was already pitch dark. I collapsed onto the sofa, buried my face in a soft cushion, and drifted off not long after. When I woke up early the next morning, I was momentarily confused. Feeling the large bed beneath me, I jolted upright. How had I gone from the sofa to the bed? I had no memory of it at all. I got up, made myself a sandwich, then went into the study and pulled up the living room security footage from the night before. A little after 11, I entered the living room, didn't even turn on the lights, and fell asleep on the sofa. I slowly dragged the progress bar forward. At 12:30, my finger paused. In the video, the living room door opened. A tall, slender figure walked in. He turned on the lights, saw me asleep on the sofa, and froze. It was Evan. I raised an eyebrow slightly. So he had come to this villa last night, after all. Evan slowed his steps as he walked over to the sofa and simply stood there, looking down at me. Because of the camera angle, I couldn't see his expression. Which only made me wonder what, exactly, he had been looking at. About 3 minutes later, Evan bent down and lifted me into his arms. His movements were, strangely, gentle. He carried me into the bedroom. He didn't linger. After settling me on the bed, he went into the study, picked up a few things, then pushed the door open and left. I was still puzzling over Evan's inexplicable behavior, trying to analyze the logic behind it, when the phone in my hand suddenly vibrated. It was my assistant, Lucy. After graduating from college, I had joined a subsidiary under the Harrington Group, starting from the very bottom. 5 or 6 years later, I'd worked my way up to a subsidiary vice president position. Before the accident, a project I was overseeing had made little progress. Yet not long after I was discharged, good news began arriving one after another. Juggling wedding preparations and work at the same time, I was practically doing the job of 2 people. Lucy updated me on the project's progress, explaining that a long-standing obstacle had finally revealed a breakthrough. They would need someone from Horizon Technologies to help make the connection. She sent me the contact information for Horizon Technologies' CEO and spoke cautiously. Ms. Harrington, this Marcus, he was a high school classmate of your fiancé's. I was silent for a few seconds before replying, I understand. I called Evan several times, asking to meet. Each time, he brushed me off with one excuse or another. I realized he was deliberately avoiding me. So on the 3rd evening, I drove over and waited outside his building. Evan came downstairs looking refreshed. When he saw me, he clearly froze. He turned his gaze away. Why are you here? I looked him over. Are you busy? He nodded. High school reunion. It's almost time. If there's something you need, we can talk after I get back. A high school reunion? My eyes lit up. Is Marcus going too? Evan looked at me, frowning. Why are you asking about him? From his expression alone, I already had my answer. I opened the passenger side door. Get in. I'll drive you there. Evan stared at me for a few seconds. Without any fuss, he got straight into the car. On the way, I deliberately steered the conversation toward Marcus, chatting idly to sound him out. Evan wasn't as cold toward me as he used to be. He actually responded to everything I said. The atmosphere was unexpectedly harmonious. When we arrived, I got out of the car with him. Evan stopped where he was. I turned to him and asked, "Can I go up with you?" Why? I thought for a moment. Are you worried that Sherry might be upset if I'm there? Don't worry, I won't go out of my way to provoke her. I just want to. Before I could finish, Evan lifted his foot and walked toward the elevators. He stopped at the doors and glanced back at me. Aren't you coming up? I smiled and stepped over to stand beside him as we waited for the elevator. Chapter 5. Their high school reunion was held in a private VIP room at the Skylark Club. Evan's arrival instantly energized the room. Evan's here? Evan. I thought you weren't coming. I heard you're getting married next month, you've got to enjoy your last night of freedom. Tonight we're definitely going all out. The enthusiastic greetings came to an abrupt halt when they noticed me behind Evan. Oh, your fiancé came too? Come in, come in. I could feel the atmosphere shift the moment I stepped inside the room. To be honest, I felt a little uncomfortable myself. I greeted them politely. Just call me Anna. I glanced around. Sherry wasn't there, she must not have arrived yet. Marcus was sitting in the corner on the left, speaking quietly with a classmate. When he noticed my gaze, he looked up and smiled at me. I was just figuring out how to approach him without drawing attention when the conversation in the room suddenly turned to Evan and me. Evan and Anna really did grow up together and end up together, someone said with a laugh. Back when Anna first transferred to our school, she followed Evan around all day. Yeah, I remember once Evan had a fever and collapsed at school, another chimed in. Anna cried her eyes red. Every break between classes, she ran to the infirmary to check on him. I remember that too. As they brought up the past, memories of all the foolish things I'd done back when I was ruled by my feelings flashed through my mind like a reel on fast forward. There was no longer any flutter or nostalgia, only embarrassment. Evan smiled faintly beside me, saying nothing. Honestly, I knew those two would end up together, someone suddenly said, deliberately lowering his voice. Everyone's interest was piqued, mine included. He shot Evan and me a teasing look. Senior year, remember when Evan got cornered by some guys from another school? He even got hurt. With that reminder, others recalled it too. Yes. That was pretty scary. The man continued, I was nearby that day. When I heard the commotion, I ran over. Evan had been hit from behind and was barely conscious. They were about to keep beating him when Anna came charging out from another alley and threw herself over him without thinking, taking the blow for him. What? That dangerous? Oh my God, that's terrifying. Everyone listened in shock. I felt very little, it had been so many years already. The man sighed. So that's when I knew. With Anna loving Evan that deeply, there was no way those two wouldn't make it. I smiled lightly. We were young back then. It's easy to act on impulse at that age. I was hoping Evan would say something to steer the conversation away, but when I turned, I realized something was off. He was frowning, and when he looked at me, his gaze was complex and heavy. Back then. His voice was hoarse. You were the one who protected me? I paused, thinking he had quite the selective memory if he'd forgotten something like that. I rolled up my left sleeve, revealing a scar along my forearm. See? That's the scar from back then. Evan's pupils contracted. Instinctively, he reached out, as if to touch it. At that moment, the private room door was pushed open from outside, accompanied by a bright female voice. Sorry, traffic was terrible. I'm late. Everyone turned to look. A young woman stood in the doorway, dressed in a casual beige suit, her features refined and striking. It was Sherry. Chapter 6. The instant Sherry saw me, the smile on her face froze. It quickly returned to normal. "Ms. Harrington, you're here as well?" My gaze flicked sideways. I rose at once, my arm brushing past Evan's fingers as I stood. I moved too quickly to notice the flash of disappointment that crossed his face. As I adjusted my sleeve, I stepped to the left. "Sherry, why don't you sit here? I'll move over there, it's a better spot to see the city lights." Just like that, I gave up the seat beside Evan. Most people in the room knew at least something about the complicated dynamic between Sherry, Evan, and me. So when they saw me directly usher Sherry to Evan's side, they were all taken aback. I didn't bother worrying about their reactions. I walked straight over and sat down next to Marcus. Smiling, I raised my glass slightly. "You must be Marcus from Horizon Technologies. I've heard a lot about you." Marcus glanced at me, then at Evan across the table. His expression had darkened noticeably. He looked puzzled, but responded politely. I chatted with him for a while, and gradually steered the conversation toward the project my company was currently working on. Marcus was highly professional. As soon as the discussion turned serious, his expression sharpened, and we began exchanging ideas back and forth. "Evan, what are you looking at?" Sherry's voice snapped him back to attention. He withdrew his gaze and finished his glass of red wine in one go. Surrounded by the familiar, gentle scent of Sherry's perfume, Evan felt himself relax for a brief moment. He turned to speak with her, a smile on his lips. Yet his eyes kept drifting, uncontrollably, toward the left. His old classmate was talking animatedly with his fiancé. And his fiancé hadn't spared him a single glance. Without realizing it, he had already downed a second glass. Just as Evan reached for a third, Sherry pressed a hand over his. "Evan, what's wrong with you tonight? Are you in a bad mood?" He couldn't force himself to say he was fine. For reasons he couldn't quite put into words, even to himself, his mood was terrible. The room was loud with chatter, and Evan couldn't make out what was being said across the table. But every so often, he heard his fiancé's clear, unrestrained laughter. It was a sound he realized he hadn't heard in front of him for a long time. "Sherry," Evan said, absently turning the wineglass in his hand. "Do you remember senior year, the time I was attacked and passed out in the alley behind the school?" Sherry nodded. "I remember. When I woke up, I was already in the hospital." "You were there with me," Evan said, lifting his gaze to her. "You told me you were the one who brought me in. But why didn't you ever mention that Anna was there too?" Sherry's fingers clenched abruptly. She looked up, clearly flustered. "What? Anna was there too? I didn't know. When I got to the alley, you were the only one there." Evan didn't press further. He simply nodded. Drinking and casual chatting soon grew dull, and someone suggested a round of truth or dare. The idea was met with enthusiastic approval. There were cards readily available in the private room. As the game went on, people laughed and shouted, and the atmosphere quickly heated up. It was far too noisy for conversation. My discussion with Marcus was forced to come to a halt. After exchanging contact information with him, I was already looking for a chance to leave. When the bottle on the table suddenly stopped, pointing straight at Evan. Finally, Evan's turn. "Draw a card already." Someone handed him the deck. Evan smiled and casually pulled one out. But the moment he read it, his smile froze. An old classmate to his left couldn't contain himself and craned his neck to peek. "A sweet kiss with the person on your right?" The room fell silent for a split second, all eyes snapping to Evan and Sherry beside him. Then, almost instinctively, those gazes shifted toward me. Even Evan, the center of it all, looked up at me. There was a flicker in his eyes, as if he were waiting for me to say something. I didn't have the energy to deal with a scene like this. My objective for the night had already been accomplished, so I took out my phone. "Hello? I'm out right now. I'll be back soon." Honestly, I shouldn't have come in the first place. I'd only interrupted what was supposed to be a perfectly legitimate date between him and Sherry. I slipped my phone back into my bag and smiled apologetically. "Sorry, something came up at home. I'll have to head out first. Have fun, everyone." Chapter 7. I had barely stepped out of the private room when the door behind me was yanked open again. Evan followed me out. He was moving quickly. He caught up with me at the elevator. Anna. I paused. That was fast. Already kissed? Evan frowned, practically grinding the words out. We didn't kiss. I glanced at him but said nothing. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. Evan followed. It wasn't until we exited the elevator that I finally couldn't hold it in any longer. What exactly are you trying to do? In truth, Evan himself didn't know what he was trying to do. He had only followed an instinct, chasing after her without thinking. He hadn't even stopped to consider whether Sherry might be left feeling awkward alone in the private room. He didn't think it through, didn't dare to, why he had done it. Evan rubbed his temple. I didn't drive tonight. Can you take me home? It was a flimsy excuse. I couldn't be bothered to pick it apart. I gestured for him to get in the car. Half an hour later, I pulled up in front of his building. When I turned my head, Evan was already leaning to the side, asleep. He must have drunk too much. Even in sleep, his brow was tightly furrowed. I called his name a few times. He didn't move. With a quiet sigh, I called his assistant. While waiting, I pulled out my phone and added Marcus as a contact. Then I messaged Lucy, carefully going over what needed to be covered in tomorrow's meeting. I was so absorbed that I didn't notice Evan had already opened his eyes. Chapter 8. Evan had noticed Anna's change long ago. Ever since the accident, something about her had been different. But the change was so subtle that he couldn't quite pin it down. Anna had said she'd traded something unimportant for a second chance at life. It sounded like an obvious lie. And yet, somehow, it lodged itself in Evan's mind. For no clear reason, his heart had skipped a beat. He had the uneasy sense that something was already lost, beyond recovery. That feeling of dread had followed him all the way to tonight. Until now. Until he lay there pretending to be drunk in the passenger seat. Watching the woman beside him completely absorbed in her work, not sparing him a single glance, he finally understood. Anna truly didn't love him anymore. The girl who had followed him around, centered her world on him, for nearly 10 years. From some point onward, she had really stopped loving him. Evan studied Anna's profile, his thoughts drifting far away. He remembered the first time they met. She had been cornered, clearly overwhelmed. He'd watched from the side for a moment and thought she looked like a young deer that had wandered into the human world by mistake. Her eyes had been bright. Clear. Unguarded. She'd caught his attention instantly. It stirred his protective instinct. So he stepped in and helped her out. Later, Anna transferred to his school. He continued to tease her. He found it cute, amusing, how easily her face flushed. At first, he had treated her like a younger sister. But as time went on, his family began mentioning her more and more often. Saying that she would one day be engaged to him. That she would marry him and become part of the Caldwell family. Evan had only been a teenager back then, right at the height of rebellion. He, too, had longed for a kind of love untouched by money or family arrangements. The more his family tried to push him and Anna together, the more impatient he grew with her. And it was right then that Sherry confessed to him. Sherry was nearly as well known as he was, beautiful, academically outstanding, and admired by half the school. So when she handed him a love letter, blushing and shy, Evan felt a stir of attraction. Part of it came from a boy's vanity. Part of it came from the pressure at home, which only fueled his instinct to rebel. Evan accepted Sherry's confession. Yet even after they became a couple, he never felt the kind of heart-racing love he thought he wanted. In fact, when he saw how downcast Anna became after learning he was dating someone, an inexplicable discomfort surfaced in his chest. He had already been planning to break up with Sherry. But then came the conflict with the neighboring school. That evening, he was ambushed. Someone struck the back of his neck with a club, and he went down immediately, pain exploding through his head. In his haze, he felt someone throw themselves over him. A girl was crying, calling his name. His eyes were open, but everything was blurred. Amid the sobbing, he lost consciousness. When he woke again, he was in the hospital. The girl was slumped beside his bed, fast asleep. She was gripping his hand tightly, her sleep restless and uneasy. Evan saw her face. Sherry. He hadn't expected her to shield him so recklessly. His heart shook, with gratitude, with a sharp, aching tenderness. Any thought of breaking up disappeared completely. Evan laid his hand over the back of hers and slowly closed his eyes. Later on, Evan learned the truth. He learned that his family had forced them apart, belittling Sherry until she was worth nothing in their eyes. All that resentment, frustration, and anger. He poured it out, almost without exception, onto Anna. He began to ignore her. To blame her. At their engagement banquet, he humiliated her in public. And yet, despite everything, Anna still seemed to love him steadfastly. She would carefully prepare gifts for his birthday. She would be the first to come get him when he drank too much, staying up all night to take care of him. She even learned how to cook and bake for him. And so Evan began to live under an illusion. It was as if, no matter how he treated her, Anna would always forgive him. No matter what happened, she would always love him. That illusion gave him a sense of security. As if he had a guaranteed safety net, Evan grew increasingly reckless. And because of that illusion, he did something he would regret for the rest of his life. On the night of Sherry's birthday, Evan left Anna alone on the highway. When the call from Anna's parents came in, Sherry was laughing as she smeared cake frosting across his face. One arm wrapped around her waist, Evan leaned down and kissed her lips, while answering the phone with the other hand. The background noise on the line was chaotic, but he still heard the words clearly. Anna was in a car accident on the highway. She's in critical condition. She might not make it through the night. The hand at Sherry's waist went slack. The phone slipped from his grip and fell to the floor. In that instant, an indescribable panic surged through Evan. He didn't even stop to explain to Sherry. He bolted out in a blind rush. Distracted and shaken, he rear-ended another car on the way. By the time everything was dealt with and he finally made it to the hospital, it was already the next morning. When he pushed open the hospital room door, Anna looked up at him. Her face was pale, her head wrapped in bandages. But her eyes were still bright. Evan's hand tightened around the doorknob, then slowly relaxed. No one knew that, in that moment, he repeated the same words over and over in his mind. Thank God. Thank God. Chapter 9. After Evan was taken away by his assistant, I returned to the Riverside villa. When life gets busy, time seems to speed up. As the wedding date approached, Evan and I met several times. Mostly to go over the guest list or discuss other wedding-related details. The day before the wedding, Evan came by the villa to confirm the final schedule. Before he left, he asked me a question. Anna, if we had a choice in this marriage, would you still marry me? I thought about it, then gave him an affirmative answer. Yes. Evan froze for a moment, and looked up at me, a flicker passing through his eyes. I explained calmly, in terms of background, we're evenly matched. Marrying you is a major boost to my career. And since you don't love me, chances are we won't live together after the wedding. We'll just need to put on appearances occasionally for our parents and the media. For me, that's an ideal arrangement. The light in Evan's eyes dimmed little by little. Still unwilling to let it go, he asked, that's all? Yes. He stood in the entryway, fists clenched tightly at his sides, then, finally, loosening in defeat. I've already broken up with Sherry, he said. I was genuinely taken aback. How did that happen? I asked. Was it because we're getting married? Evan didn't answer. I walked over, putting on a considerate tone. You two didn't get here easily. Do you want me to help explain? I could tell her that we're just a marriage on paper. Evan snapped his head toward me. You'd explain it? Yes, but, I smiled faintly. I'll need you to do me a favor. I heard Horizon Technologies is developing a new project. I'm very interested and would like to take a small stake. Nothing major, just 10%. Before I could finish, Evan seemed to lose what little restraint he had left. He swept the shelf beside him onto the floor. I jumped in surprise. Anna. Can you stop talking about money every time you open your mouth? He took 2 steps forward and stopped right in front of me, his chest rising and falling sharply. Between you and me, is there really nothing else worth talking about? I stepped back slightly, widening the distance between us, my smile half mocking. If not money, then what, love? Romance? That would be rather inappropriate, wouldn't it, Evan? I almost died because of you. Frankly, the fact that I didn't hurt you at all is already an act of mercy. The color drained from Evan's face. It was as if my words finally woke him up. He didn't even dare look at me again. Turning abruptly, he walked out. His steps were too fast, too hurried, almost fleeing. The wedding scheduled for the next day ultimately never happened. A call from my mother summoned me to the hospital. My father lay in the intensive care unit, eyes closed, his condition critical. I had always known his health wasn't good. He practically went to the hospital once a month. But my mother had kept the details from me. It wasn't until that day that I learned the truth. He had end-stage kidney failure. The moment she saw me, my mother grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the doctor. Doctor. Her blood type matches my husband's. She can donate a kidney to him. Can you arrange the surgery as soon as possible? I stood frozen for a long moment, then turned to look at her in disbelief. The doctor glanced at me and asked instinctively, "And you agree to the transplant, ma'am?" "Of course she agrees," my mother said urgently. I almost laughed. Slowly, I pulled my arm out of her grip. Standing there with my hands in my pockets, I said calmly, "I don't agree." Smack. My mother slapped me across the face. My head snapped to the side, my cheek burning. She stared at me, eyes wide with fury. "Anna. You ungrateful little wretch. The Harrington family raised you all these years, spared no expense on you, and this is how cold-blooded you are? That man lying in there is your own father." I thought carefully about her words, then suddenly understood. "I've never been able to figure it out," I said slowly. "If you were always so dissatisfied with me, why did you insist on bringing me back to the Harrington family in the first place? Now I get it. Aside from donating a kidney, I was just a spare organ, wasn't I?" Sensing the tension, the doctor quietly excused himself and left. In the office, only the two of us remained. A mother and daughter facing each other like sworn enemies. One last time, my mother demanded, "Are you doing the transplant or not?" I smiled. "And I'll say it one last time. No." Her eyes went bloodshot. She raised her hand to strike me again. But someone suddenly rushed in from behind and pulled me back, placing himself squarely in front of me. I looked up at Evan, standing between us, surprised. My mother's hand brushed past his jaw, leaving several thin streaks of blood. She froze for a moment, her gaze darting back and forth between us. Then her tone shifted. "Anna, if you don't agree today, then from this moment on, you are no longer a daughter of the Harrington family. Your father and I will disown you. Without that status, what do you think you can do? You won't be able to stay at the company. And you won't be qualified to enter the Caldwell family either. To be honest with you, we never stopped grooming Ivy. She's more than capable of replacing you now." Ivy, the girl who had once competed with me for the marriage. "Auntie, please calm down," Evan said in a low voice. I pushed his hand aside and met my biological mother's gaze directly, speaking slowly and clearly. "Then let her come back. Let her replace me at the company. Replace me as the Caldwell bride. Replace me as father's kidney donor." I scoffed. "You make it sound like it's such a privilege." Without another glance back, I lifted my chin and walked out of the hospital. Chapter 10. Evan chased me down to the underground parking garage. He stood in front of my car, eyes red. "You're really giving up everything," he demanded hoarsely. I hit the horn. "Move. You don't want the Harrington family anymore, and you don't want me either? So whoever I marry now, you don't care at all?" I shot him a cold look and stepped on the accelerator. Evan's expression changed instantly. As the car brushed past, he stumbled hard to the side and fell. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Then sped out of the garage. Thinking back on his question, I almost laughed. Giving up everything? How could that be? I had worked myself to the bone at the Harrington Company for years. How many projects had I secured for them? And now they thought they could just cast me aside? Not a chance. I was going to take everything that was rightfully mine. And leave them with nothing. At the end of 2024, 2 months after the Harrington family publicly announced they were cutting ties with me and convened a board meeting to remove me from Harrington Group, an email began circulating. It contained evidence of the Harrington Group's tax evasion, bribery, and fraudulent accounting. The email was sent to several of the company's major competitors. By morning, it was all anyone was talking about. As Harrington Group teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, the Caldwell family wasted no time in terminating the engagement. While the Harrington family was scrambling, dealing with court summons and relentless pressure from multiple competitors, I had already left for another city, taking with me the funds I'd secured from both the Harringtons and Evan. I leased an entire office building. This was where I planned to start over. I had the capability, the capital, the connections. Oh, and I'd also poached the elite team the Harrington family had spent years cultivating. They worked for me now. After the new company was established, I ran at full speed for nearly 3 straight months. 3 months later, everything finally began to settle into place. And I was at last able to breathe a little. News about the Harrington family started popping up on my phone. The report said that the chairman of Harrington Group had been hit by a series of blows and had fallen into a coma. Although they'd spend a fortune to find a compatible kidney donor, his physical condition meant surgery still couldn't be performed. Judgments from the earlier cases had come down as well. For falsifying quotas, tax evasion, and a string of other illegal activities, Harrington Group would face massive fines. The legal representative would also be held criminally liable. I read the news with little reaction. That evening, Lucy drove me home from the office. She mentioned the Harrington family's current situation offhandedly, stealing glances at me through the rearview mirror as she spoke. I smiled. What? Do you think I'm being too cold-blooded? Lucy shook her head immediately. No. I just think Ms. Harrington is incredible. After being hurt like that by your own biological parents, you didn't collapse, you found a way to fight back hard. You're the most impressive person I've ever met. I laughed and scolded her lightly. You little flatterer. Lucy stuck out her tongue and fell silent. I turned to look out the window. Streams of traffic. Towering buildings. Thinking about it carefully, if I were still the person I used to be, someone who believed in love, who still held expectations for family, this kind of blow probably would have destroyed me. After all, the people who hurt us most are usually the ones closest to us. Because we care so deeply, disappointment cuts sharper. Pain runs deeper. Once you stop caring, though, there's nothing left that can hurt you. Ms. Harrington. Lucy frowned, tension creeping into her voice. She stared into the rearview mirror. That black car behind us, it's been following us for a long time. Something feels off. I glanced into the mirror. Sure enough, I saw the car she was talking about. As if it had realized we'd noticed it, the black car suddenly accelerated, overtaking several vehicles and charging straight toward us. Speed up. I said sharply. See if you can shake it. Lucy's face went pale, but she was an experienced driver. Her instincts kicked in. She yanked the steering wheel, turning onto a less crowded road, then slammed the accelerator to the floor. What was truly terrifying was this. No matter how Lucy changed lanes, no matter how fast she drove, the black car stayed right behind us. And it was closing the distance. Ms. Harrington, it's going to hit us. Lucy's voice was shaking. My expression darkened. My life had only just begun. Was it really going to end here? I refused to accept it. The black car accelerated again, clearly about to ram us, when suddenly, from the left, a Mercedes G-Class burst into view. Bang! A thunderous crash exploded behind us. Lucy slammed on the brakes. Thrown forward by inertia, I crashed hard into the front seat. My head spun for a few seconds. I heard Lucy shouting. Ms. Harrington? Ms. Harrington, are you okay? Ms. Harrington, look, doesn't that car look familiar? Rubbing my head, I called the police as I pushed open the door and stepped out. The road behind us was a mess. The Mercedes G-Class had plowed straight into the black sedan, flipping it completely onto its side. The Mercedes itself was badly wrecked. The scene assaulted my senses. I stood there, stunned, for several seconds. Until Lucy let out a sharp cry. Ms. Harrington. That's... I followed where she was pointing. The driver's door of the Mercedes was forced open. Someone staggered out. His head was smeared with blood, but I recognized him instantly. Evan. He barely managed to steady himself before frantically turning his head. When he saw me standing by the roadside, he froze, then began limping toward me, dragging one injured leg. Lucy couldn't bear to watch. She hurried over to support him. Evan looked up at me. Are you okay? I looked him over. I'm fine. At least, I look a lot better than you do. Evan nodded. That's good. That's good. As soon as the words left his mouth, he lost consciousness and collapsed heavily onto the ground. The ambulance and police arrived almost at the same time. Evan and the driver of the black car were taken away in ambulances. Lucy and I went to the station to give statements and cooperate with the investigation. The results came back quickly. The driver of the black car was a hired thug. Someone had paid him to teach me a lesson. And who hired him? I asked. The young policewoman hesitated. I answered for her. My mother, right? She nodded. I forced a smile and thanked her. I understand. Thank you for your work. So everyone thought I was pitiful. I didn't see it that way. If she dared to hire someone to kill me, then she should have been prepared to face the consequences once it all came to light. I hired a seasoned attorney and made my position clear. Let the law decide, I said. I want a fair and impartial judgment. Chapter 11. When I went to see Evan at the hospital, his condition had improved significantly. Except for one thing, his leg was ruined. Evan sat in a wheelchair. When he saw me come to visit, he actually seemed to be in good spirits. He even tried to comfort me. Don't worry. The doctors say I'm recovering well. I nodded. I'm not worried. Your injuries are still much lighter than what I went through. Evan clenched his hospital gown tightly, unable to say a word. I realized I'd been a bit too blunt, even the doctor beside us shot me a faintly disapproving look. So I added, Evan, I'll consider what you owed me paid in full. From now on, don't come looking for me anymore. His eyes filled with hurt. Can't you give me one more chance? His tone was almost pleading. I sighed. After a long silence, I asked him, did you see that strange pawnshop this time? Evan froze, then shook his head. Then can you guess what I pawned there? He didn't speak for a long time. I thought he probably knew the answer. His voice trembled. Does that pawnshop really exist? Who knows? I said lightly. If you believe in it, then it exists. When he didn't respond, I took a freshly printed business card from my wallet and placed it on the edge of his hospital bed. So that's why, I smiled faintly, there's no us in this lifetime. But if you ever want to do business, you're welcome. Evan was taken home by his family to recover properly. The doctors said his other injuries would heal, but that leg, even after recovery, would always leave a visible limp. The once elegant heir of the Caldwell family became a cripple. And yet, there was no shortage of women willing to marry him. Sherry was one of them. She was persistent, I'd give her that. After many twists and turns, Evan still chose Sherry in the end. On their wedding day, I even attended the reception. I swear, I didn't go just to make things awkward. It was just that at the Caldwell family's wedding, there were simply too many people I wanted to connect with. Every one of them was a valuable contact to cultivate. Holding a stack of business cards, dressed in an evening gown, I moved smoothly through the crowd. At ease, articulate, perfectly in my element. My company had already reached a respectable scale, with a promising future ahead. These days, when people saw me, they addressed me as Ms. Harrington. Evan's group of old classmates were seated together at a separate table. They kept glancing toward a certain spot, unable to stop whispering among themselves. Hard to tell, one muttered. She's probably pretending, but her acting is way too good. Wasn't Anna head over heels for Evan? Showing up at his wedding, she must be heartbroken. They went on and on, not noticing when the groom quietly appeared behind them. Evan followed their gaze. The woman they were watching stood poised and composed, every movement radiating confidence. Anna doesn't love me anymore, Evan said, raising his glass toward his old classmates. He drained it in one go, smiling bitterly. Right now, the person she loves most is herself. At this point, my love life is a public service announcement. Free of charge.